Greetings, Pilgrims, to episode 24 of the Polygon Pilgrimage. Today we're going to be starting our Learning ZBrush series, and I'm not going to give you guys a one-for-one button here tutorial. There's plenty of those on the web. What I'm going to show you is the little things that I've learned that I find to be really valuable. Now, ZBrush is an awesome piece of software, guys. I feel really guilty that I have it and I don't use it to its full potential. It's kind of like owning a Ferrari and never driving it. You know, what's the point? So, ZBrush is a digital sculpting and painting program, and you can use it for 2D and 3D. Now, in the 3D game art realm, we use this primarily to do high resolution, high poly meshes to bake out normal maps and other maps. So we're going to be focusing on that, but I do want to let you know that this is an incredible piece of software that really, game art is the fusion of technical skill and artistic skill. And a lot of times you have to keep all of that in mind all at once while you're working. But this will allow us to take the technical and throw it out the window and say, I just want to focus on being creative. You do the math for me, and that's exactly what it does. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the screen as you see it now is the exact default setup for ZBrush. And I'll go through these areas one at a time very briefly. At the top are all of your menu and options. On the left here are brush palette and textures, or materials and RGBs. On the right here is your tool palette, and any of these at the top that you see here tool and tool. What this means is you can take any of these and you can break them off and move them over to these side, and you have a bottom one too. These little shelves is what they're called. So I can expand these out. See, here's even more options. And it can start to get pretty crazy looking, or I can collapse this one to give myself some more working space. So those are our three main areas. What we're going to focus on in today's episode is the tool palette. Now over in the tool palette, you see this squiggly S looking thing. This is the button or tool that you choose to bring up all of your most recently used items. This is a great little tool to get to some of the things that you want to use very frequently, or if you we're using something and you say, oh, I don't know where that was, or I forget what that was called, it'll be in this list. It's kind of like a recently used or most used, and it's really great for that. So we're going to start off today with just a simple sphere 3D. And notice when I click, nothing happens at first. I've just selected that, and I'm automatically in draw mode. So what I'm going to do is just click and drag on the canvas, and there's my sphere. Now at the moment I can't really do much with it. If I click again, I'm going to drag another one out because technically I'm in 2D draw mode or 2.5D, and I'm using a 3D sphere for this nice smooth lighting and all this other stuff, but it's not a 3D object yet. So if I go over here and click the edit or the T key on your keyboard, now I'm in edit mode. Now I've told ZBrush I want this to be a 3D object. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn on this polyframe. This is just to show you the lines here, so that you can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to give you a quick overview of the navigation. Now if I click anywhere on the canvas, which is this area around the sphere, and drag, this is going to be my rotate. This is to rotate the object. Now if I click and hold Alt, I can click and hold anywhere in the canvas, and I drag the mouse now, this is my panning. So you're panning either the scene or the object, depends on your inclination. I tend to think of it as I'm panning the scene, like you're moving a camera. So there we go. Now, as I'm rotating the object, if I click and hold the shift, it will automatically snap to the nearest 90 degree. So you notice this pole here that I'm looking at, kind of like the front of an eyeball. If I'm near the center of it, or near the front facing towards the camera towards us, and I hold shift, it pops and points right at us. But if I'm almost at the top here, and I click and hold shift, it pops to the North Pole, so to speak. So that's really handy in case you have a front to your model or you have a direction you want it to snap to. Now there are two ways that you can zoom. I find the easiest way to zoom is if I am holding Alt and I left click and drag, and then while I'm doing that I let go of Alt. Now if I continue to drag, I'll end up zooming the model and I find this useful because it's the same operation to pan as it is to zoom, which you tend to do a lot of in conjunction with one another. So why not? There is also the ability to control and right click, and if you do that, then you zoom without it changing scale and without it moving. Now that might be handier for you, but for a lot of my work here, I'm using a stylus, so I tend to use keyboard commands that I can use without having to have a right click so that I can work more efficiently. So that's the beginnings here. We have our navigation down. So next we're going to get into how do we start sculpting on this object, what do the brushes mean, and what are some of the basic tools for that, so you can start to push and pull some shapes and play with it. And then next episode we'll go into some more detailed things. Alright, so now that we have our 3D object here and we want to start sculpting on it, I'm going to go ahead and click on the object, and you'll see that it says, to enable sculpting, please convert this to a Polymesh 3D. So at the moment, ZBrush sees this as a 3D object, just not a sculptable 3D object. So up here we're going to click Make Polymesh 3D, and you'll notice that it got darker. It's because it applied a color, and I had the polyframe on to show you guys the wireframe. So we're going to go ahead and turn that off for now. Now, let me center this on my screen a little bit. There we go. If I just click and drag right away, I'm eager beaver here. Look at that. I start sculpting onto the model, and right now I'm in the Z add. So the top here, Z add. So just like a real life sculpting with clay, this is adding clay and this is subtracting clay. And you'll see here this Z intensity slider. This is how intense from the surface, think of normals, how far out from the surface am I going to be pulling this clay. So if I do 100% and I click and drag, it's a strong intensity. And if I come down to say something like 15 or so, and I pull from the surface, it's going to be a whole lot more subtle. And so this is really great if say we're making some mountains here, right? Then I want some lower steeps at the bottom, but I want some really high peaks in the middle too. So I could build it up over time if I wanted to. Or I could just go up and say, you know what, just give me really strong shapes and just start laying the groundwork in a whole lot faster. So that's good to know. But now, since I have add and Z sub, it's kind of annoying to come up here and click the button to say, oh, I want to subtract to make like a gully here. Okay, oh, but now I want to work on the mountains. Go back up to add. Okay, I'll start adding some more in here. That back and forth is a real time killer over the lifetime of a project. So instead, what I do is I just leave it on my favorite one. So say add, because I'm working on mountains. So I say, okay, here's some more mountains. We're going to go this way with it. And I say, oh, but I need my gulch to continue. I'm just going to hold Alt. And when I hold Alt and click and drag, I do the inverse of whatever my tool selection is. So if I'm on the add and I hold Alt, I'm going to be subtracting whenever I click and drag. This is super helpful for when you have two types of things that you're doing and they're kind of inverse to one another, but you don't want to keep going back up and forth to the top. So speaking of which, going back up and forth to the top to change my intensity every time is really annoying too, isn't that? I'm not one for repetition that is unnecessary. So instead of doing that, let's go ahead and learn the short keys here. If I hit the S key, this will change my draw size without having to go to the top. So I can say, hey, I want really big shapes now. Give me a bigger draw size. That's really cool. And now if I hit the U key, this will bring up the intensity slider. So this will tell me, hey, I want some real soft shapes for around these edges here. I don't want to really perturb the surface too much. But then I say U, I want some really perturbed surface because I'm going to start throwing in some more mountains back here. So now I don't have to go to the top for any of that. I can just be back here and messing around. And here again, Alt, here we go. Let's combine the two. S, let's drop our draw size. U, let's drop our intensity. And hold Alt and click and drag. And now I'm continuing the gulch without even having to go to the top. So it saves me a lot of time throughout the lifetime of a project. Now, the other thing is, say I've got this area over here, and here I'm going to up my draw size, I'm going to up my intensity, and I'm going to leave it on add, and I was making these mountains, and I said, oh, you know what, I'd really love to have this area over here be some sort of plains. It's too rough here, look, oh, it's all messed up, it's terrible. I really like this to be kind of smoothed out in a flat area where I could put a castle or something. Well, that's where we're going to introduce, let me up my draw size before I do this. Something like that's good. We're going to introduce the smoothing. If you hold the Shift key, you'll notice that my reticle here turns to like this blue or purple, or depending on your monitor. Now, and you'll also notice that my stuff at the top here is kind of going nuts. It automatically sets a focal shift, and it turns on RGB, and the RGB intensity lights up, and my Z intensity is changing slightly. And look, our brush over here is changing from a standard brush, which is what we've been sculpting with, to smooth. So it's setting the smooth brush based upon my preferences here. Now if I just click and drag, you'll see it starts to smooth out the surface. And it has a pretty high intensity at first, so I usually turn this down to somewhere between 10 and 25 so that I can have a little bit more control over the areas that are being smoothed. And I don't mind clicking a few times to make an area more smooth, if that means that in some other areas where I want just a little bit of smoothing, I can just lightly pass over it like that. So there we go, holding shift and clicking and dragging, and I've smoothed out my planes here so I can bring that castle in and drop it right here on top of this hill. So there we go, there's our quick introduction to the brushes and what they're for. So I encourage you guys to load up ZBrush, give it a try. And there are many other brushes here. If I go into the brushes here, you'll see there's many other brushes, and we're going to get into that. But for now, just start with the standard brush, learn how to use the Z sub, Z add, and change your focal shift and your Z intensity without having to go up to the top. And from there, we're going to start working on some cool stuff here, learning more about our brushes. Next time we'll get into brushes and then masking, and it goes exponentially from there, guys. There's so much that this program can do, and we have barely scratched the surface. So until next time, keep practicing, get better. Please enjoy the quote at the bottom of the page. And as always, I will see you next time when the pilgrimage continues.